Hey friends, tonight we're going into one of the strangest, strictest and most charming sororities in the ancient world, the Vesta of Rome. So before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video, but only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. Please tell me in the comments where and when you watch it. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world join us. Now, dim the lights or turn on the fan to emit a soft background hum. Let's start tonight's journey together with ease. Before we delve into oath, punishments, and the astonishing lack of job benefits, we need to understand what a Vestal Virgin actually is. Because in ancient Rome, people solved problems by sacrificing goats, consulting birds, or assassinating Caesar. Vesta was regarded as the priestess of emotional support for the city. If they are calm, Rome will be calm too. If they messed up, everyone would immediately panic, just as if Jupiter had complained himself. This is not merely a religious order, it was the most elite institution in Rome, a powerful combination of superstition, patriarchy and dramatic fear. The Vestas were not chosen for this job because they wanted it. They were chosen because Rome believed the 6 little girls could unite the empire more than the Senate. To be honest, history has proved that they were not wrong. The Vestas live in the Vestas house, which is a magnificent marble villa right next to the Roman square. Think about luxurious real estate, but constantly being punished by God. It has fountains, private gardens, elegant columns, and is basically an ancient world version of a sanatorium. Apart from yoga, you keep an unextinguished flame. Unless you enjoy being publicly criticized for every poor harvest within a 50-mile radius. Their work is symbolic. Their existence is symbolic. Their purity is symbolic. Everything around them was screaming, "Look at us." The gods still like Rome. They are walking billboards, waiting for God's approval. If a kitchen god trips in public, half of the city people would consider it a warning from heaven, while the other half would blame the nearest politician. You would think that the security of an empire does not depend on a teenage girl's ability to walk in sandals. However, we are here. Despite the great pressure, the priestesses enjoyed privileges that other Roman women did not have. They can own property. They have front-row seats for the event. They can exist without a man's permission. In Rome, this almost made them superheroes. For your way to carry out the execution, touch the kitchen god. With a bang, you will be pardoned immediately. It's definitely wild power. That beneath the marble, the robes and the sacred PR, these girls were symbols of both worship and fear in Rome. When things go well, they're respected. When they go wrong, they are blamed. Basically, that's the customer service representative of the ancient world version. So, before we discuss their rules, responsibilities, and disasters, please keep this in mind. Vestal Virgins were not merely Roman priestesses. They're anti-anxiety drugs in Rome. Rome has been in a state of tension. Becoming a Vestal Virgin is not a girl's choice. It is not a call, a profession, or a passionate career goal, like becoming a gladiator influencer or a professional grape trampling. No, this is a state kidnapping under the guise of a religious ceremony. The Romans called it captio, which means to plunder. This might be the most honest name the Romans came up with. Imagine a 6-year-old girl playing with wax dolls in a noble family. Suddenly, Maximus, the high priest of Rome, appeared at your door with a group of people and said, "Congratulations. The gods want your daughter." No returns, no exchanges. The selection criteria are so shallow as to be pleasing. This girl must come from a noble family, physically flawless. The Romans were fond of judging their children, mentally sharp, obedient to orders, spoke gently, and would never stage a rebellion. If she stutters, limps, or has a freckle on her face that seems to be an ill omen, she will be eliminated. If she looks calm, quiet, and very vulnerable to being kidnapped, then she has won the prize. When a girl is chosen, her father has no chance to negotiate, bargain, or pretend that he has left the child behind a market stall. The state government took her away directly. The Romans like to call it honor. But let's face the reality. Congratulations. Your daughter will serve God for 30 years. If she makes a mistake, she might be buried alive. This is not news posted on the wall by parents. The moment of choice is a wonder. How Maximus touched the girl and said, Good heavens, I've caught you, dear. This feeling is both sweet and terrifying, just like someone handing you a small cake with a spider inside. Then there is the parade. The child walked past the forum, passing by a group of people who pretended to be surprised instead of gently heaving a sigh of relief. Their daughter was not chosen. While whispering blessings, people secretly thanked every deity because their own children had escaped the natural disaster. The girl entered the Vesta temple, waiting for the hair minus cutting ceremony. The hair symbolizing her previous life was cut off and might have been buried beside the ruins of her social freedom. From that moment on, she was no longer a normal child. She belongs to God, to the nation, and to a long list of terrifying expectations. Rome called this the greatest honor. Children might call it by other names, because saying it out loud is absolutely not allowed. Once a girl is officially conscripted into the army, the next step is very simple. She left her family forever. There are no weekend visits, no holidays, and no mom. Could you answer my text message? The Vest was the most sacred employee in Rome. Ryan believes that sacred employees work best where they are completely isolated from any support system. For as soon as a girl stepped into the threshold of the Temple of Vesta, her original identity vanished even faster than the moral integrity of a senator of the Senate. She is now the daughter of the state, which sounds noble until you remember that the educational methods in Rome included a lot of shouting, superstition and public punishment. The award ceremony itself is dramatic. She walked along the Pontifex ex Maximus, surrounded by priests, musicians and enough incense to smoke half of the square. People gathered together not because they cared, but because the ancient Romans regarded every event as a spectator's ball. Look, little Julia has been chosen. It's good for her. Also, thank goodness that's not my child. As soon as you enter, the first thing you do is to have a ritualistic haircut. Her long hair from childhood was cut off and then she was buried like a fallen hero. This symbolized her separation from the secular world, which was dramatic but very important to Rome, a city that loved symbolism almost as much as it loved public executions. Then there was the white veil, the simple robe, and the new name. All of these indicated that she had transitioned into a sacred life. Rome basically renamed it the New Product Launch Event. New. Improved. Now the purity has increased by 100%. Then the girl was escorted into the Vesta's palace, a vast and luxurious complex that looks like a palace but functions like a sacred boarding school. It has a fountain, a kitchen, servants, a garden and an elegant bedroom. Apart from freedom, think of Hogwarts. But everyone will be confined forever. While generously protecting the virgins, this house also trapped the security guards are patrolling. All the doors are guarded. You can freely stroll in the garden, corridors and courtyards, but you cannot enter the city 5 feet away. The message conveyed is very clear. You have everything you need except for your previous life. However, for many families, this is still regarded as a victory. Their daughter is now untouchable, holy and lives a better life than most nobles. Parents boasted about it at the banquet. Yes, our daughter is now a priestess. It's no big deal. Her tiny shoulders bear the fate of the entire empire. Leaving home was both a promotion and a life sentence. The Romans were very good at designing such things. Now, a newly born holy infant has severed ties with her old life at the ceremony. It's time to move her into her new home, Vesta's palace. Let me tell you, this place is just wonderful. Marble floors, arched colonnades, and carved fountains bubbling like spa resorts. A garden in full bloom, elegant statues, and a room so large that one can hear the echoes of their own anxiety. Theoretically, this is heaven. In fact, this is a 5- star-gilded cage run by priests who believe that excessive smiling will offend the goddess. Located beside the Roman square, the house's position perfectly carries the greatest symbolic meaning. Vesta guards the heart of Rome, and Rome constantly watches over them. Imagine that you live in a penthouse in Times Square. Unless your lease states that you will stay here, you will face God's punishment. This place is very large inside. The 3-story living area, cooking room, storage room, ceremony space and long corridor seem to have been designed for a dramatic rhythm. In the central courtyard, there is a beautiful swimming pool and garden, where 8-year-old boats can stroll gracefully while contemplating the burden of Rome's destiny. Then again, if you are not allowed to leave, even luxury goods will lose their luster. The doorman was not standing at the door, but the potential threat of violating the sacred rules was enough to make anyone follow the rules. Technically speaking, these vests are free inside, but they can leave the building without permission. Not recommended. Unless you enjoy the kind of passionate disciplinary beating that only the ancient Romans could muster up. Despite this, compared with ordinary Roman women, they had the legal right to be a mere ornament, and their lives were like those of nobles. They ate the best food, wore fine clothes and had servants to help them. Their room is very clean, well minus lit and free of mice. This is a luxury that Rome seldom offers. But on the other hand, you live under constant surveillance, with sacred expectations. You know that a single mistake could cause large minor-scale panic. There are mandatory purification rituals, and a few senators are clamoring about omens. Every sound, every gesture, every sigh in the dead of night echoes in this building that is more than just a house. It is a symbol, a political tool, a religious monument, the place where childhood dreams are crushed into service, just like olives are crushed into oil. In this marble palace, the mascots will spend decades learning to walk, speak and breathe, and will survive at the level of tranquility usually reserved for statues. A luxurious home. Yes, Freedom House. Absolutely not. Vesta's house is the most beautiful reminder of the ancient world that comfort does not equal freedom. Once a young Vesta settles down in her marble minor-centered, luxurious prison, it's time for her own duties. Rome attached more importance to this task than to elections, omens or the structural integrity of bridges. Let the eternal flame burn. This is no ordinary flame. It is neither a decorative torch nor a cozy fireplace fire. This is the sacred flame of Vesta, the spiritual W-I-Phi connection of ancient Rome. As long as the city is brightly lit, Rome will thrive and prosper. If it went out, Rome believed that chaos would break out immediately. The crops failed, the army was defeated, and politicians made worse decisions than usual. Basically, when the Romans did not want to blame themselves, they attributed everything to God. For the nuns, this means a simple rule: never let the fire go out. They take turns day and night like little sacred firefighters, and they are also expected to be spotless, silent and peaceful. Imagine the pressure. You are only 8 years old. Your sandals are too big. You miss home. You have the responsibility to prevent the fall of the Roman Empire. Meanwhile, an ordinary adult Roman man couldn't even stop his robe from falling off. To maintain the flame, containers collect firewood, clean the fireplace, and perform ritual offerings every day. They use sacred tools, sacred procedures, and possibly sacred patience, considering that they don't even allow them to roll their eyes. The entire process must be carried out with elegance. Don't be in a hurry, don't complain, and never accidentally blow out the flame. If the flame really goes out, it will be a natural disaster. For religious reasons, the responsible Vesta will be gently whipped. According to the priests, although we all know that Roman gentleness rarely appear in the same sentence, this city would hold emergency purification ceremonies, sacrifice animals, recite prayers, and loudly suspect which god they had offended. This time, but there is a twist here. The extinguishing of a fire is not always the ship's fault. Sometimes a storm blows. Sometimes the wind blows the wrong smoke. Sometimes God just thinks it's very dramatic. But Rome never blamed the gods. Oh, no. Rome accused the teenage girl holding a broom of having a job description longer than most senators' resumes. However, despite the impossible stakes in the war, the plague, the coup, and any strange thing illegal did that day, Vesta kept the flame alive for over 1,000 years. The reason why the flames could last was that the 6 arified priestesses were extremely proactive in not letting down a goddess with a strong record of revenge. Before Vestal Virgin is trusted to approach the sacred flame, she must undergo a full 10 years of training, a full 10 years of crash courses, learning precise rituals, perfect public occasions, and the art of avoiding accidentally offending the goddess. She might destroy the entire city from missing the grain offering. The first 10 years were basically a recruit training camp for the priestess. Besides push-ups on obstacle training, the girls learned how to fold their robes correctly, remember hundreds of ritual instructions, and stand for long periods without scratching their noses. This sounds simple, but think about Roman religion. Everything has symbolic meaning. Everything is meaningful. If you go to the left, everything could go horribly wrong. The course includes reciting hymns without mispronouncing a single syllable, learn purification rituals, including water, fire, smoke, grains, or occasionally all of them at the same time. Understand the elements, for no one wants to misunderstand a scroll ending on the wrong side of a statue. Maintain sacred tools such as brooms, knives, spoons, and any other things that are said to be needed by the gods. How to stay calm when the senator starts cursing the comet again. Oh, they must also learn to read and write. This was a big deal because Roman girls usually did not receive formal education. While other girls get married or practice spinning, the nuns are studying the law, ritual texts, and the philosophical questions that only arise when someone forces you to sit quietly by the sacred flame for several hours. However, they are not isolated. The older nuns played the roles of teachers, mentors, and somewhat terrifying role models. Imagine a strict nun and a political advisor, and someone who can keep a flame burning for 27 years with just 4 hours of sleep. These women take their work seriously because they know what is dangerous. The pride of Rome, the anger of Vesta, and of course, the possible responsibility for disasters that were completely beyond their purview. The training is very strict. The mistake was corrected immediately. If a girl shows too many silly smiles, too many daydreams, or is overly interested in anything outside the temple, she will gently remind her through lectures, ceremonies, and occasional ominous silences that she is now leading a sacred life. A sacred life does not include hobbies. By the end of 10 years of training, the girls were not just well-prepared, they were trained and refined into a perfect combination of calmness, precision, and existential fear. Whether ready or not, they are about to enter the next decade, fully fulfilling their Vestal duties, when the states of consequences and success means no one notices your presence. After 10 years of long training, memorizing the rituals, mastering the sacred silence, and resisting every impulse to roll her eyes at omens, a Vestal Virgin finally entered her second decade, a decade of formal service. This is an era where everything matters. I'm new here. There's no more. Oh dear, I forgot. During this decade, mistakes led to huge consequences, or at least a very dramatic overreaction in Rome. As devout priestesses, these women were not merely in charge of the sacred fire, they became spiritual tools of ancient Rome. Their daily work is endless, precise, and a bit tiring. Nourish the eternal flame, the main event. They collected the purest firewood, prepared the offerings for the sacrifice, and took care of the flames of the Muses as carefully as diffusing bombs. The wrong move turned the entire city into panicked Reddit posts. The flame has gone out. Emma. Ritual purification. The nuns prepared holy water, incense, salt, flour, and other magical ingredients to maintain the spiritual disinfection of Rome. As soon as a grain of grain was spilled in the wrong direction, the priests would immediately think that the bolts were furious. It was clearly not aimed at themselves, but at the nearest vista. To protect these sacred items, Rome kept its most important legal documents, wills, treaties, and political secrets in vests, because nothing can better reveal secrets than handing over your private documents to a group of frightened virgins who live under religious surveillance and attend public ceremonies. Vesta remained very calm when attending ceremonies, festivals, and sacrifices. Imagine watching a bull sacrifice up close with a calm expression, knowing that even if you retreat, someone will say, the gods do not agree. To maintain purity is not merely physical purity, but symbolic purity. Their emotions, gestures, clothing, postures, breathing, and perhaps their thoughts must all be flawless. If a Vesta looks very sleepy, people will whisper. If she sneezes during the ceremony, the entire temple will panic. It is a lucky charm for walking in Rome. If a nun encounters a death row inmate on her way to execution, even by chance, she will be pardoned immediately. Imagine ripping over a forum and accidentally releasing a murderer. Through all this, They are expected to demonstrate a calm dignity. Don't slack off, don't complain. I'm tired of taking responsibility for the universe. Just silently understand that they represent the stability of Rome, a city with little stability. These 10 years have been the peak of their power and also the peak of their pressure. These ships were revered, and required to reach an incredible high standard. This was the Roman code, meaning that we trust you, but if anything goes wrong, it is definitely your fault. After 20 years of training, performing, panicking, and maintaining an absolute refusal to extinguish the flame, Vestas entered their final decade, 10 years of teaching. In this era, they transformed from terrified apprentices to terrifying mentors. This was equivalent to a senior employee in ancient times. He had experienced everything, and now observed the new employee with the subtle judgment of a marble statue. Teaching is not optional. When a Vestal entered her third decade, she began to be responsible for training the next generation of small, anxious recruits. This means that she must now explain the ritual for which she once wept, display the tricks she once messed up, and maintain that kind of calm authority that can only be gained by standing motionless by the fire for many years. The schedule of a senior priestess includes the duties of a mentor. She guides beginners through complex rituals, teaches them sacred opportunities, and supervises their daily trivialities. The aim was to prevent children from accidentally summoning the wrath of the gods or knocking over anything important. In Rome, this was all about enforcing rules. In this era, she finally became the one who issued ominous warnings, such as don't approach the sacred flame, don't touch that scroll, it is even older than your ancestors. During the purification process, do not breathe too loudly. Deep down in her heart, she might really like this part. Correct the mistakes. It's normal to make mistakes during training until a senior priestess appears behind you, staring at you with that kind of gaze. You know, that expression was like saying, I've kept this flame burning for 27 years. I won't let you ruin my record. Teach Middenfolson's rituals. It's not the modern kind that requires crystals and deep breathing, but the ancient Roman kind. You need to remember 50 procedural steps and raise the offerings to just shoulder height at the same time. Teach survival skills. None of these were written anywhere, but every senior priestess had a mental notebook full of wisdom, such as, never trust a priest who says it won't take long. If you hear thunder at a ceremony, pretend it is auspicious. If the elders asked the gods whether they were angry, the correct answer would always be no. The elder Vesta places fear above all else and imparts to the novices the sacred lessons that every Vesta will eventually learn. You are of vital importance. You are honored. But if you sneeze again, it will be an ill omen. At the end of this decade, a Vesta completed a sacred mission. She used to be a student, a servant and a spiritual worker, and now she's a teacher. A complete circle is formed in the midst of fire, discipline and 30 years without any scandal at all. Despite facing all kinds of pressures, fears and fiery terror, the privileges enjoyed by the Vestal Virgins made other women in Rome seem insignificant in their own lives. Rome liked to say that it respected Vesta. This time the empire did not exaggerate. The lives of these priestesses were better than those of most senators and much better than those of ordinary Romans. Every day, they had to struggle with public baths, bad wine and malfunctioning roads. The power of these vests began the moment they came into the public eye. They walked through the street with an air of dignity that even the highest official respected. Ordinary women must be accompanied by their father, husband or any male relative who has not yet gone missing. Here they walk independently. In a society where women are legally closer to the home than citizens, the kitchen god is actually a superhero. They were awarded front-minus-row seats in the competition, an honor usually reserved for the elite of Rome. When a priestess is seated in an arena or a circus, the crowd will automatically fall silent because if there is a priestess present, the gods are also watching her. Symbolism was powerful. Rome worshipped symbolism just as it worshipped public entertainment. Their influence is not merely about etiquette. A high priestess can pardon prisoners. If a person sentenced to death happens to encounter the kitchen god on his way to carry out the execution, even if it is by chance, even if he trips, he will be immediately set free. Imagine that as long as you are in the wrong place at the right time, you have the ability to save a life. This is the sacred authority that politicians dream of. They also enjoy financial freedom. A priestess can own property, write wills and manage her own wealth, while other women need legal guardians for simple transactions like buying a glass of wine. The nuns, like experienced professionals, sign contracts and acquire properties. Rome regarded them as legitimate adults and others as confused young children. Even the law bows to them. The testimony of the priestess in court carried extraordinary weight. It was not because she was absolutely right, but because the Romans believed that the goddess Vesta personally guided her honesty. Of course, there's no pressure. I just hope that every word you say reflects the sacred truth. However, all these forces have obvious advantages. They are respected because they are indispensable. And they are indispensable because the Romans believed that disasters lurked in every corner. Vesta's privilege is balanced, for she knows she is always a misunderstood expression, far from being an omen. They are respected. They are very terrifying. Perhaps most importantly, they were under the surveillance of the entire city, the priest, and West himself. If there was any rules that the Romans cared more about than the sacred flame, it was Vesta's chastity. The Romans treated this oath as seriously as they treated a declaration of war. For calculate the omens of a slightly confused chicken. A chaste woman must remain completely flawless and extremely pure for 30 years. It was not because Rome cared about her personal morality, but because Rome believed that her chastity was directly related to the stability of the entire empire. It is no surprise that Rome never explained how a woman's love life could overthrow the civilization of 1 million people, that logic seldom slowed down the pace of Roman religion. The theory is very simple. Vesta, the kitchen god, is the goddess of the stove, the hymen the sacred flame. Her priestess embodied her purity. If a nun breaks her vow, her purity will shatter the family in the symbolic sense of Rome will collapse. The actions of the entire city are as if these vests are propped up a cosmic stacked hour with pure willpower and chastity. The expectations are ruthless. There are guards around Vesta. There are rules, and people have always suspected that somewhere there is a guard watching them with sacred binoculars. They can walk freely in the city, yes, but if people detect even slightest sign of a scandal by scanning your face, freedom is no longer freedom. When a priestess walks down the street, half of the people will whisper, "She's in love." The Senate will immediately discuss possible omens. Of course, Roman men did not have such an oath. A senator can have 3 wives, 12 mistresses, and a dubious number of housekeepers, yet no one gives him a single glance. That during the festival, if a Vesta makes a meaningful eye contact with someone, the priest will start grinding their shovels. His double standard was so blatant that even ancient historians rolled their eyes. Maintaining chastity is not merely about avoiding physical relationships. The priestess must avoid situations that might seem suspicious. Private conversation, danger, a smile for half a second more, concern, standing too close to the handsome rider, treason. Nuns are not just celibate. They are living symbols of purity, expected to float in life like sacred statues, occasionally undergoing fire maintenance. The worst part is that there is no second chance. A single accusation, whether valid or not, may ruin a person's career, reputation, and even their entire life. The Romans erected these icons high on their bases, and the only direction in which they fell was disastrous. This is the paradox of being a Vestal Virgin. Absolute honor is balanced on the verge of absolute destruction. If a Vestal Virgin broke her vow of chastity, Rome would not regard it as a private matter, a personal mistake, or even a scandal. No, it has turned into a full minor-scale cosmic crisis. The Romans believe that Vesta's purity was not merely symbolic. It is the spiritual life's support system of this city. So if a priestess's vow is shattered, the solution must be equally compelling. Because Rome never gave up halfway, they invented one of the most dramatic punishments in ancient history, burying her alive. Yes, alive. It is obvious that the Romans took the word overreaction as a divine indication that there is a twist. Rome prided itself on its civilization, which meant that they could not legally execute a nun. After all, she is a sacred woman belonging to the goddess Vesta. Therefore, they created a huge, morally questionable loophole that even Roman lawyers would squint at. They placed the ship in an underground room with a bed, a lamp, water and a small amount of food, and sealed her inside. Strictly speaking, they didn't kill her. They merely placed her in a place where she would eventually die alone. Rome was always able to find creative ways to justify its dramas. The ceremony began with a public trial. The accused female Vestal stood before Pope Maximus, usually trembling under the symbolic purity and pure fear. The priests asked her a series of questions, not so much to seek the truth as to tick a box on the ritual list. After all, once Rome senses the smell of scandal, the facts become dispensable. The accused Vesta can claim her innocence until her voice hoarse, but the fanatical and superstitious Rome seldom cared. A poor harvest, a solar eclipse, or an unlucky pigeon omen could all bring her misfortune as easily as true guilt. The procession to the execution ground was very solemn. Vesta was placed in a closed sedan chair, so no one could see her and no one would risk accidentally touching her. Heaven did not allow a priestess destined to die to accidentally pardon a criminal on her way to the grave. People watch in silence, for nothing serves as a better warning to a society than seeing their spiritual idols being punished by geological enthusiasm. Meanwhile, the man involved in the case, assuming he did exist, was whipped to death in the square, and the efficiency of the Romans in carrying out this verdict was disturbing. Finally, the living burial ceremony reveals the relationship between Rome and the waistcoat. They are indispensable and respected, but once superstition turns against them, they will be terrifyingly abandoned. If you think modern politics developed through scandals, then ancient Rome was willing to cultivate a virgin for you. Nothing could excite the city more than the rumor that a priestess broke her oath. Whether this is true, partly true, or made up by a senator during a slow news week, just a little improper hint could send Rome into a moral panic sooner than you could tell a good omen. Unfortunately, Vesta lives in the most politically weaponized location imaginable. They are at the intersection of religion, superstition and public bigotry. A perfect storm of accusations. A priestess doesn't need to do anything wrong. All she needs to do is appear a little nervous during the ceremony or sneeze at the wrong moment, and half of the senators will interpret it as displeasure from the gods. The other half took this as an opportunity to ruin someone else's career. Politicians like the scandals of nuns. They are the Swiss Army knives among political tools, used to divert public attention, eliminate opponents, or convince everyone that Jupiter hates your opponents more than yourself. If a powerful person wanted to bring down an enemy and accused the enemy of lowering a Vesta, this was an ancient version of throwing a nuclear bomb. After all, who can argue with God? The public cooperated with astonishing enthusiasm. The Romans loved drama. If a Vesta is suspected of illegal behavior, people will gather in the square, explain in a low voice, and invent the symptoms of divine wrath. Slightly curved lightning, poor harvest crops, crows standing on the wrong roof of the temple. Obviously, the universe is giving hints. It is obvious that these hints directly point to the problematic kitchen god. This city has turned into a real conspiracy forum. These experiments, are more like performing arts than experiments. The accused Vesta stood there, listening to the priest recite the ceremony. The senators delivered an inspiring speech. The public stared at them as tensely as people watching a gladiator match, not realizing that it was actually about religion. Evidence is optional. Resonance is enough. If the Romans thought that year was inauspicious, then Vesta was guilty. Even innocent nuns are not safe. Some people were sacrificed to restore public confidence, while others were sacrificed to satisfy political hatred. Some others were simply because Rome believed that disasters could not be random. Someone has to take the blame, preferably a woman with no criminal record. Finally, Vesta's scandal reminded everyone of Rome's deepest fear minus chaos. Nothing can release this fear better than blaming a young woman who has devoted her entire life to preventing chaos. For a civilization that prided itself on engineering, military power and the ability to conquer continents and skirts, Rome could have been astonishingly vulnerable in one thing: the extinguishing of the sacred flame. You might think that a city with water pipelines can create an entire military-industrial complex would handle a simple fire accident calmly. Absolutely not. The men of the eternal fire flickered in the darkness. Ren's reaction was as if someone had pulled out the plug of God's life-sustaining machine. When the sacred flame went out, yes, this kind of thing happened more frequently than the priests were willing to admit, and the city immediately fell into a spiritual crisis. Everyone on the forum gasped. The priests were running around like chickens fleeing from a thunderstorm. Senators immediately attributed it to foreign powers' political opponents, or the ominous shape of the dark clouds from last night. Because in Rome, everything makes sense, even if it's an accident. The priestess in charge was usually so frightened that she froze, for she knew exactly what was going to happen next. It suddenly and openly reminds us that the Romans did not believe in mistakes. Everyone has a theory about why the flame fails. Some people attribute it to God's wrath. Some people accuse the ceremony of being poorly executed. Some people attribute it to the girl's posture, breathing, or aura. No one complains that it is very difficult to make a fire in an open-air temple on a windy Mediterranean night. According to the Roman priest, the punishment for putting out the flame was beating, but it was not serious. That Roman priests were not known for their gentle discipline. This punishment was carried out in a dark place and was said to be in order to uphold Vesta's dignity. Of course, being whipped in a small dark room was not decent, but at least the Romans liked to pretend. Meanwhile, large scale purification ceremonies were held in other parts of the city to restart the spiritual system. People sacrificed animals, chanted prayers, burned incense until half of the square was filled with the smell of sacred barbecued meat, and then reignited a fire in the purest way. Sunlight is usually focused through a device similar to a magnifying glass. Obviously, the gods prefer solar energy. The entire test is not merely a religious emergency. This is a political performance. Rome needed to show the gods and itself that it was still in control. The flame of right means hope. The punished kitchen god implies responsibility. A complete ceremony means a certain degree of restoration of stability. But behind the drama, everyone knows the truth. The priestess is a human being. Flames are ever changing, and Ren, the magnificent, to also be destroyed by something as simple as a gust of wind. After 30 years of serving the gods, tending to the anxiety-inducing flames, performing flawless and precise rituals, and living forever under the threat of burial, the virgins of the Vestal Temple have reached a milestone which must feel like redemption from the gods' retirement. And then at Vestal completed her 30 years of service. She finally returned freely to the world of mortals, a world she had never lived in since childhood. She might have half believed that this world no longer existed. After retirement, a ship became rare in Rome. A legally independent woman can own property, sign contracts, manage finances, purchase land, sell land, and sue others. Most astonishingly, her every move is not supervised by a male guardian. In such a society, even wealthy housewives need permission to sneeze at the general direction of the market. In the past, priestesses were free walking oddballs. Many Romans sought to marry retired priestesses, believing that their purity and sacred connection would bring good luck. After all, what better way could there be to bless your family than marrying someone who has been staring at the sacred flame and maintaining a perfect posture for 30 years? Rich men queued up, hoping to obtain a wife who symbolized cosmic recognition, stable luck, and reduced the possibility of family curses. But there is a twist here. Most of the decommissioned ships are not married. After decades of complete autonomy and spiritual authority, the idea of suddenly reporting to one's husband must sound as alluring as returning to the tomb chamber they had reluctantly avoided. Imagine that 30 years later you regain your freedom, but immediately lose your independence because Publius wants to find someone to manage his villa. No, thank you. Those who are married sometimes find it hard to adapt. Life outside Vestal Palace is noisy, unpredictable, and full of people who do not understand the basic rituals and etiquette. Ordinary citizens often make mistakes, touching sacred objects incorrectly, ignoring omens, and failing to maintain a pure mind during festivals. From the Vesta might witness the misfortune of a family and almost instinctively perform a purification ritual. However, retirement also has its pleasures. A former priestess could walk around the city like a sacred barometer without being watched. She can enjoy the festival without worrying that her smile will be analyzed as the meaning of the universe. She can go to the market to buy a piece of fruit without considering its religious symbolic meaning. In short, she can live like a human being rather than a myth. However, the public has never completely shaken off the halos surrounding decommissioned ships. When they passed by, people still whispered blessings. The children looked in awe. Some citizens believed that even after retirement, a Vesta would still carry the spark of the sacred flame within her. Perhaps she is indeed like this, but now it finally belongs to her. For nearly 1,000 years, Vestal Virgins have been at the center of the spiritual identity of Rome. Having endured civil wars, assassinations, plagues, imperial scandals, and the emperor who truly deserved supervision, these Vests kept the flames burning. They are the quiet constants in this city that never stops shouting. But everything about Rome, even its most sacred traditions, eventually came into conflict with history's favorite hobby minus change. By the late 4th century AD, the Roman Empire had undergone tremendous changes. For bedtime, Christianity was on the rise with the enthusiasm of a new company backed by sacred venture capital, while traditional Roman religion was gradually losing government funding. The old gods were eliminated and new doctrines took their place. Suddenly, people looked at the eternal flame and said, "Do we really need this?" This has always been a dangerous issue in any era, especially in Rome, where people once sacrificed animals because mercury was abnormal one day. Then there was Emperor Theodosius I, whose life's mission seemed to be to erase the pagan history of Rome, just like deleting outdated files from a sacred computer that had been buried in dust. In 394 AD, he issued a decree putting an end to Vesta's order. The Vesta Temple, which was once the spiritual center of the city, has fallen silent. The sacred flame that generations of frightened priestesses protected with the dedication of overworked interns has been extinguished forever. People's reactions were mixed. Traditionalists were terrified. Superstitious citizens nervously waited for an earthquake, a plague, or an angry god to strike lightning on the forum. That the world did not collapse immediately. The crops did not have a poor harvest. The eruption of the volcano did not cause intense protests. To the surprise of many, life went on and people gradually realized that Rome would not collapse just because there were no 6 women guarding the sacred bonfire. But its symbolic influence is huge. The extinguishing of the sacred flame marked the end of the religious identity of ancient Rome. The Vest, once a symbol of purity and nobility, now finds itself a relic of a declining world. Some were absorbed by noble families, others retired quietly, and still others remained in Rome as a living reminder of the passage of an era. The houses of the mascots were abandoned, and the elegant courtyards were eventually filled with rubble silence. The statues cracked, the fountains dried up, and the marble hall that once echoed with soft prayers and ritual footsteps turned into ruins. Ironically, it was better preserved than many Roman marriages. Perhaps this is the bittersweet truth. Vesta's virginity won't end with failure. The war ended because Rome had changed. Their flames were not extinguished by disasters, scandals, or divine punishments. Its demise was because the empires that created them eventually rewrote their identities. A last glimmer of light on Vesta also vanished into history. With it, one of the most extraordinary sororities in the ancient world was born. When people imagine the Middle Ages, they usually think of wars, plagues, or towering castles. But beneath the rough and disciplined surface, life in the Middle Ages was filled with games, competitions, and physical challenges which shaped identities, just like beliefs or feudal obligations. In the medieval concept, playing was not a luxury, it is a social force, a way to maintain order, enhance physical fitness, build alliances, and measure courage. In this world, strength and honor were as real currency as silver. The uniqueness of medieval games lies in their profound reflection of class. Both nobles and farm workers could be athletes. However, their definitions of sports exist in completely different worlds. For farmers, daily labor already requires physical strength. Farming, chopping firewood, carrying water and taking care of animals for ginnate endurance. Therefore, when farmers gather to play, they enjoy community-centered rough activities, wrestling in the fields after the harvest, chasing each other in games similar to labels, or kicking rough leather balls on the village grass. Their games are spontaneous, loud and usually chaotic. It is a popular way to escape from work and rarely ends before sunset. On the other hand, the nobles engaged in sports and also prepared for war. They hit balls with blunt ones to enhance their reaction ability, train with a long gun to improve aiming in the competition, practice archery to strengthen the muscle groups needed on the battlefield. Their competition had a ceremony, banners fluttering in the courtyard, attendants watching, and the rules were carefully preserved. The drama of the nobility is a rehearsal of a conflict trapped in silken honor. Even casual gains like hunting or hawking are linked to status, requiring land, equipment and well-trained animals, which only the elite can afford. However, despite these differences, medieval societies were in agreement on one thing. Games reveal personality. Winning by strength is indeed admirable, but winning by intelligence, perseverance or courage is even better. This belief connects everything together, from a monk contemplating his next move in a chess game to a young squire holding a long sword under the watchful eyes of his master. Even a usually strict church understands the value of games. Some monasteries allow the playing of board games, such as early chess or Hana chess, to enhance strategic thinking. For villages and noble courts, games were not merely a form of entertainment. They are integrated into the culture, shaping relationships, hierarchies and identities in a world defined by hierarchy and struggle. In the Middle Ages, archery was not merely a pastime. This is not only a survival skill but also a legal responsibility. In many societies, especially throughout England, the bow became a great equalizer, a weapon that enabled commoners to determine the fate of the kingdom. For this reason, archery soon became the most serious sport for the middle and lower classes. Integrate sports, military training and national identity together. For farmers, archery means food and protection. A skilled archer can bring rabbits, birds and even fawns home, bringing invaluable advantages to their families in harsh seasons. But archery is also a means of defending against danger. Raider, werewolf, hostile lord. The bow is affordable, and more importantly, it can be learned without noble blood. This accessibility has deeply integrated it into rural culture. On Sundays or festivals, villagers gather in the open fields to test their targets, betting with drinks, bread or showy rites. These competitions were very lively, filled with laughter, teasing and the sound of arrows hitting wooden targets. However, for the king, archery was a strategic need. It is well known that the British monarch requires all physically fit men to practice on weekends and holidays. The law prohibits boring games such as dice rolling or football and orders people to shoot. Monarchs know that a well-trained archer, even a poor one, can determine the outcome of a war. They are right. In Cressy, Iron Daisy and Court, ordinary archers defeated fully armed knights, reshaping medieval warfare. The longbow is very difficult to handle. It requires tremendous force, with some bows pulling over 100 pounds. Archers not only train their arms but also their entire upper body, back, shoulders and core. It usually develops unique asymmetrical muscles, which can still be seen in today's skeletal remains. Because of the high physical demands, the competition is both a sport and a form of regulation. To stand out, it means endurance, patience, and instincts honed through countless outdoor activities. Among the nobility, archery had different styles. They practiced hunting or displaying with a curved bow, leaving the battlefield role of the longbow only to the common people. For them, this sport is closely related to elegance. Falconry shows, horseback archery or precision shooting during court festivals. No matter what class one holds, archery symbolizes discipline and control. Every shot is a test of balance, breathing and composure. Drawing a bow means facing gravity, the wind and your own nerves. For people in the Middle Ages, hitting the target with an arrow was not merely a victory. In a world where strength and skill are the means of survival, this is a reflection of one's character. If archery demonstrated precision and discipline, then wrestling showcased the primitive, unfiltered strength of medieval life. This was a movement of farm workers, millers, shepherds and travelers. This is a test of muscles, balance and tenacious determination. Wrestling doesn't require equipment, special training grounds, or noble titles. All it needs is an open space, to willing opponents, and a group of people eager to compete. This competition is both a social drama and a sports event. In villages across Europe, wrestling competitions are part of festivals, markets and festival celebrations. After a long period of labor, the men challenged each other and engaged in a competition that combined friendly competition with real physical struggle, equity, diversification, a pot of beer, a loaf of bread, a kiss from a girl with a hair band, or simply the honor of being the strongest person in the village. These competitions are not completely lawless. Most people follow unwritten rules, such as not hitting others, not digging at others, and not biting others. You win by throwing your opponent to the ground or forcing him to submit. However, despite these restrictions, the competition can be intense, leaving bruises, sprains and sometimes fractures. Because farmers led a physically demanding life, their bodies naturally adapt to fighting. Wrestling is a way to vent tension and a means to resolve disputes without escalating into serious violence. A person who has been insulted in a tavern might say, "Come out, don't fight with a knife. Instead, throw the matter into the soil to solve it." Victory brings status. Failure means laughter, teasing and usually makes you buy a round of drinks. The upper class also has its own wrestling style, although it is more organized and ritualistic. Knights incorporated combat as part of their military training, learning to throw down their opponents in armor or engage in effective combat when dismounting in battle. Manuals from the German combat school even design specific hold, locks and maneuvers for armored wrestling. It reminds people that beneath the elegant chivalry, medieval warfare might have become cruel yet intimate throughout Europe, and regional styles emerged. Cornwall wrestling has its unique jacket, Brittany wrestling features sweeping throws, and the Scandinavian form is rooted in Viking traditions. These changes reflect the local culture, that the core of this sport has not changed. The two people proved their strength and courage through pure physical confrontation. In a world without gyms, wrestling was a blend of medieval weightlifting, martial arts and social entertainment. It reveals character, builds friendship and sometimes resolves resentment. A simple sport that carried the complex emotions of daily life in the Middle Ages. If wrestling is a primitive force and archery is a discipline, then medieval football is pure chaos wrapped in tradition. This is a sport that belongs entirely to ordinary people. Noisy, muddy, joyful, and sometimes even dangerous. Forget about the rules, uniforms and referees you imagine today. In the Middle Ages, football was more like a village-wide brawl, with a bowl somewhere under the pile of footballs. However, despite its cruelty, it was still regarded as one of the most active forms of public play in the Middle Ages. Competitions are usually held on festivals such as Easter, Confessional Tuesday, or village celebrations. Two large groups, sometimes entire parishes, meet in open fields, narrow alleys, or the narrow rural areas between towns. The target could be a church door, a tree, a riverbank, or even the village square of another group. There is no fixed number of players. 10 or hundreds of people attended. The venue has no boundaries, which means the game might spread over rivers, barns or the occasionally unfortunate market stalls. The only true rule is very simple. Send the ball to your goal in any way that doesn't hurt. Even the last condition sometimes seems more like a suggestion. Grappling, shoving, shoulder blocking, and scuffling are all permitted. In the competition, no one would blink for losing a shoe, tearing a corset, or being pushed face down into a cesspit. Injuries are very common, such as nasal fractures, ankle sprains, and rib fractures. That's so well after. Cheers and the collective excitement that enlivened the entire village. The ball itself can be anything, from an inflated animal bladder to a leather-wrapped bundle of cloth. Some villages soak the ball in water to make it heavier and more difficult to control. Others use ribbons or amulets to bring good luck to their teams. Below somewhat crazy, football's played an important social role. It brings neighbors closer together, eases tensions and enhances a sense of community identity. Victory means pride. Losing a game means exaggerated complaints, jokes and promises of winning next year. However, not everyone likes this sport. The kings of the Middle Ages repeatedly attempted to ban football, claiming it to be destructive, violent and distracting from archery practice. But these bans seldom work. People like it so much. Football belongs to them, not the crown. For those farmers who toiled endlessly under the Lord and the seasons, medieval football provided an invaluable treasure. 90 minutes of unrestrained freedom, nutty comradeship, and the opportunity to feel powerful in a world where they rarely hold power. When farmers wrestled and chased muddy footballs in the fields, the sports played by the nobles seemed more like a dramatic display of elegance, grace and authority. Among them, flocking and hunting were the jewels on the crown of noble entertainment, combining athletic skills with spectacular and profound symbolism. These pursuits are not merely simple sports. They are statements of status. Riding a horse through the forest, a falcon perches on your glance, and a pack of hunting dogs gallops ahead of you. This has already declared your status before you even speak. Hawking, also known as falcon, is particularly precious. Training a raptor requires patience, discipline, and astonishing tenderness. A nobleman might spend several months building trust with a red falcon, a falcon or an eagle. This bird must be fed by hand, gently put a hood on it, keep it calm and give a reward at the right time. When everything is hunting, the flight of a falcon is a beautiful thing. Suddenly flapping its wings, it streaked across the sky and then precisely hit its prey. The nobleman holding this bird shared its glory. This is a clever, intelligent and refined sport. On the other hand, hunting is more physically demanding and dramatic. Horseback hunting requires fast horses, horns echoing through the forest, and well-minus trained hunting dogs leaping over tree roots and streams. The target, usually a deer, wild boar or fox, is driven to an open area by hunters or hunting dogs, giving noble riders a chance to show their courage, speed and control of their mounts. Chasing itself is half the excitement. Rushing through bushes, leaping over fallen logs, and moving along intricate paths all require genuine athletic ability. However, hunting also strengthened the hierarchy of the Middle Ages. Forests were divided into rights, and only the nobility could hunt specific lands or specific animals. Farmers caught poaching may face severe penalties, fines, imprisonment, and even dismemberment in the most brutal areas. This exclusivity makes hunting not merely a sport, but a visible reminder of power. Animals, land, weapons, and even clothes. The elaborately embroidered corset coat, the hat adorned with feathers and the boots polished to a shine are all symbols of privilege. Both hawking and hunting have practical military uses. Nobles who are good at tracking prey or riding fast horses have an advantage in battles. Quick response, acute observation and courage in the face of emergencies are directly transformed into a state of combat readiness. For the nobility, these movements were a manifestation of their prestige. An elegant and authoritative ballet is staged in the forest, on the grassland and under the vast sky. If hawking is elegant and hunting is noble, then martial arts competition is a pure spectacle. The medieval championship finals, parades, and battlefield rehearsals all came together in a thunderous event. For knights, martial arts competitions are not merely for entertainment. They are opportunities to gain fame, wealth and worship of the nobility. For the common people, this is a dazzling display of power and drama, and it is the place where most people are closest to witnessing the true battle of the knights. The martial arts competition began long before the first spear was broken. After several weeks of preparation, the field transformed into a vibrant arena, decorated with bright banners, family coats of arms and colorful tents. The merchants arrived very early, selling grilled meat, desserts, colorful ribbons and rough souvenirs. Bards tune their instruments, and jugglers and acrobats prepare for the growing crowd. The nobles came in a line dressed in embroidered garments and silk cloaks that sparkled in the sunlight. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation. The knights standing at the activity center were fully armed, disciplined and eager to prove themselves. The martial arts competition is the most representative one. 10 knights on horseback, each holding a wooden spear, attacked each other, attempting to pierce each other's shields or completely knock each other down. If operated properly, the echo of the impact is like a thunderbolt. The splitwood was flying around, the horses raised their hooves, and the crowd erupted. This is violence controlled by strict rules. However, every level requires courage. A mistake, a blunder may break your bones or end your career. In addition to the martial arts competition, the event also includes close combat, chaotic but organized team battles, testing teamwork and close combat skills, swords clashing, shields shattering, and knights writhing in the swirling dust and mist. Although blunt weapons were used, damage was quite common. However, these melee battles are indispensable training, simulating the unpredictability of real warfare while allowing knights to formulate strategies and reactions under pressure. Victory has brought huge rewards. A successful knight may win the armor, horses, or ransom of his defeated opponent, thereby obtaining wealth and significantly enhancing his status. What is even more precious is the appreciation of the mobile audience, especially that of the ladies. They would give the knights something that symbolized their affection, such as embroidered scarves or flowers, and the knights would proudly hang these things on their helmets. So the championship is not only open to the elite, the common people worshipped them, cheered wildly, placed bets, and retold every blow in the following weeks. For the sunny afternoon, the rigid medieval hierarchy relaxed, and everyone, whether farmers or nobles, shared the spectacular scene. The competition combines competition, honoring grandeur, making it the grandest celebration of medieval sports and martial skills. Not every medieval game was played with muscles, not or weapons. Some battles took place quietly beside the wooden table, where thought splashed rather than bodies. Board games, from early chess to later chess and dice, were deeply rooted in medieval entertainment activities. These games can serve as psychological training, social bonds, and sometimes as subtle political means, depending on who the player is. Chess was introduced to Europe through the Islamic world, and soon became the favorite of the nobility. Its ranks of soldiers, knights, bishops and queens reflect the structure of feudal society, making the game symbolic and strategic. Playing chess well means demonstrating wisdom, patience and foresight, and these virtues were highly regarded in court life. A nobleman who is proficient in the chessboard may leave a deep impression on the nobility and ladies with his wisdom, just like riding a horse or fencing. In some courts, chess has become a diplomatic tool. The opponents tested each other's thoughts in several hours of quiet and thoughtful play, and the alliance was also strengthened. The monastery also enjoyed board games, especially various forms of at hotel and early chess. Contrary to the stereotype of dull discipline, monks enjoy games that can hone their strategic thinking and offer them a bit of relaxation from the harsh life of seclusion. Some abbots encourage such games, believing that they can train monks to resist temptation, plant spiritual studies and meditate more attentively. There is not much difference between a monk contemplating a smart move and one contemplating a theological issue. Both require clarity and discipline. On the other hand, dice games mainly belong to taverns, bars and alley parties. Farmers, merchants and soldiers used this little game to bet, testing their luck with cubes carved from bones, which made loud clicking sounds on rough wooden tables. These games are fast, noisy and addictive. They can turn friends into rivals within minutes and are known for sparking arguments, laughter and occasional drunken brawls. The authorities in the Middle Ages did not like dice gambling, believing that it would distract people from their work and moral responsibilities. But no amount of scolding or fines can stop people from playing games. Bat games, known as billiards, are another common form of entertainment. It offers a balance between skills and opportunities, attracting those who want to compete without the unpredictability of dice. The soldiers played during the intervals of the battle, merchants played it when traveling, and nobles played it in the hall on quiet nights. Board games were a way to test the mind in the medieval world, just as sports test the body. Whether in the monastery's convent or in the smoke miner's guild tavern, the crackling of fragments and the tension of strategy brought people together across the social divide. While adults were fencing, hunting and wrestling, medieval children shaped their world through games that combined imagination, imitation and surprisingly practical skills development. Childhood in the Middle Ages was short. Many young people start working at 7 or 8. However, games still occupy an important position in their daily lives. Long before they entered the demanding world of adult labor, it taught them coordination, courage, creativity, and social relationships. The children are playing with what they have. Wealthier families offer carved wooden toys, miniature shields, dolls, wooden horses, and trolleys. Some children of the nobility even practiced with toy swords filled with leather to prepare for the roles they were expected to play. A little boy destined to become a knight might spend hours pretending to defend a castle made of firewood. A young girl from a noble family might use her dolls to recreate banquets or festivals and learn the gestures of etiquette and court behavior. For them, playing is a rehearsal for adulthood. Meanwhile, rural children rely on nature and wit. They make toys with sticks, mud, straw, and stones. A rag turned into a ball. Tie a small piece of cloth to a reed and it becomes a doll. The crooked branches turned into boughs. Their competition was full of vitality and spontaneity. Race on the narrow path, climb trees, chase each other in the fields, and jump over stones in the pond. One very popular game is blind hide and minus seek, where a blindfolded child tries to catch others by sound. The air is filled with laughter and mischievous screams. Children are also inspired by adults to do simulated sports. The little boys practiced wrestling in the soft soil or tried to shoot blunt arrows at straw targets. The girls also joined in, especially in the games of catching people, rolling hoops, singing around hoops, and jumping stones. Contrary to many modern assumptions, childhood in the Middle Ages was not entirely divided by gender. In many rural communities, children can play freely together until adult responsibilities separate them. Board games and storytelling are also major parts of children's entertainment. Simple dice games teach mathematics and probability, while riddles and songs preserve local folk tales. The children listened enthusiastically to the traveling troubadour, and then reenacted these stories under the trees or in the barn with their own little performances. Even housework has been integrated into the game. Fetching water turned into a race. Looking after the geese has turned into a game of pretending that the flock is an army. Cleaning the yard became his excuse to drop atoms in the dust. All forms of children's games were important components of life in the Middle Ages. In this world, despite numerous difficulties, imagination still thrives, and young people acquire the skills, courage, and community needed to enter adulthood. In the Middle Ages, games and sports were not isolated activities. During festivals and holidays, when the entire community briefly escapes the torment of daily life, they bloom most vigorously. These celebrations have turned the courtyards of villages, towns, and even castles into bustling arenas, where social classes are mixed together, competition is fierce, and the pace of work is replaced by laughter, noise, and sports performances. Sports activities during festivals have a deeper significance than mere entertainment activities. It reinforces identity, heals tension, and reminds people that they belong to something greater than themselves. Festivals are associated with agricultural and religious calendars. After the harvest, when the barn is full and the work slows down, the village will celebrate with several days of feasts, music, and friendly competitions. Football matches are surging in the fields. The Colosseum was crowded with cheering spectators, and the archery competition provided proud farmers with an opportunity to prove their skills in front of their neighbors and visiting lords. The victors can receive sashes, bread, beer, or simply the honor of associating their names with strength or precision for the rest of the year. For the nobility, festivals offer opportunities to showcase their wealth and generosity. The nobles sponsored sports competitions and offered prizes such as cloaks, silver cups, or livestock. The sponsorship is not purely out of charity, it enhances loyalty. A fowler who won a sheep or a bag of coins from his master felt proud, respected, and more closely connected to the feudal order. Meanwhile, the nobles demonstrated their strength through fencing competitions, horseback riding performances, and ceremonial hunts, reminding everyone that their status was justified. Religious festivals blend spiritual piety with collective joy. During the festival of worshipped saints, dames symbolizing revival and blessings will break out in the village. The Tug of Walk on Test represents the struggle between good and evil. The circle of dancing and singing expresses unity. The children's games were filled with laughter, Even monks who usually strictly adhere to their daily lives sometimes organize moderate competitions or board games to celebrate significant holy days. Markets and trade fairs bring another layer of festive atmosphere. Merchants from distant regions brought foreign games, exotic trinkets and traveling performers. Jugglers, people who never fell, musicians and simulated boxers, entertained the crowd and blurred the line between sports and performance. These gatherings brought new ideas and game styles, expanding the imagination of the Middle Ages and transcending local traditions. The core of every festival is a simple truth. Sports are the adhesive of society. Whether it was through a friendly wrestling match, a competitive archery game, or a muddy football match, people in the Middle Ages were reconnected. At certain moments, exhaustion, levels and difficulties vanish, replaced by celebration, community and the joy of sharing the game. Babylon was a sweltering, dusty and ambitious city. For a king who spent his entire life chasing the horizon, this was a perfect stage. In early June of 323 BC, the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, which usually housed soldiers, scribes and envoys, fell into a strange, heavy silence. The news spread like wildfire. Alexander, the invincible general who conquered from Greece to the edge of India, was seriously ill. Those who once crossed the desert and the monsoon with him now stand helplessly outside his door, waiting for news that seems to never get better. Just a few weeks ago, Alexander was still planning a new campaign. His restless mind imagined the Arab conquests, huge shipyards and new trade routes, which would link his vast empire together. Babylon would become the glorious capital of the empire, where Greek and Persian cultures merged boldly and innovatively. Alexander towed the marsh, inspected the port and offered sacrifices to the gods. He drank with his companions, held banquets and loudly dreamed of those unclaimed lands. In those days, there was no sign that his life would come to an end before summer. Then, I had a fever. Things started very calmly, almost innocent. At the banquet in memory of Admiral in U.S., Alexander complained of a sharp pain after drinking. Some people said that he was shaking all over. Some people also said that he shouted loudly and held onto his body tightly. At first he ignored it, saying that he was exhausted from constant plumbing, that by the next morning he could hardly stand up. His generals took him back to their rooms, believing that the great king would recover as quickly, tenaciously and almost supernaturally as usual. But the high fever wouldn't subside. In the following days, Alexander was sometimes awakened, sometimes awake. This man who once crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and faced war elephants and storms at sea, now even has difficulty speaking. His voice, once powerful enough to unite tens of thousands of people, has now weakened to a whisper. His eyes were burning hot. His body, usually unshakable, feels heavy and unresponsive. Outside his room, thousands of soldiers gathered together, begging for any sign of improvement. They prayed to the Greek gods, the Babylonian gods, and any power they believed could save the king who led them through the world. In the dim palace, the heat of Babylon hit you in the face. Burning incense, the book to whispering, Alexander the Great sat on the low sofa, surrounded by the anxious silence of his empire, facing the first enemy he could not defeat. Alexander suffered a wound that would have killed most people, but he survived. In India, he was shot in the lungs by an arrow. In the Balkans, his skull was shattered by a siege aircraft, and there were countless wounds, bruises and infections caused by years of war. His soldiers believed that he possessed a sacred resilience, with the spark of Hercules or Achilles burning within him. But in Babylon, all those old wounds, the endless pressure of marching, and the exhaustion of commanding eventually demanded that they pay the price. His body, once carved by discipline and battle, began to collapse at an astonishing speed. The high fever has become even worse. At first, he could still sit up straight and give brief orders to the general and the scribe, but he grew more and more tired day by day. By the third day, he could no longer walk without support. His limbs felt heavy, as if they were filled with wets, and sweat trickled down his body like waves, soaking the fine linen beneath him. Even turning his head can cause pain. His doctor tried everything that the ancient world could offer. A hot bath, cold compresses, a wine mixed with herbs, and prayers to Asclepius. It's of no help. Outside, anxiety spreads like smoke. Alexander's army was composed of veteran generals who had followed him from Macedonia to the ends of the earth. They had seen him injured, bleeding, furious and laughing, but never helpless. Now, they stood closely together around the palace gate, whispering about omens. Some people claim that God is punishing him by burning Pepilolles. Others insisted that he was poisoned by a jealous general. Several people boldly hoped that he could stage a comeback under the protection of the deity he often prayed to. In his realm, the truth was much simpler and much more cruel. Alexander's physical strength is waning. His appetite has vanished. His breathing became shallower. He had a severe fever and was in a daze, muttering his plans for future battles. He tried to stand up, insisting on checking the fleet's readiness. But his legs were bent. Only when his guards reacted quickly did he not fall down. By the seventh day, he could no longer speak clearly. He merely made a gesture, weakly pointing at the map on the wall, attempting to communicate in a wordless way. His friends, such as Tommy and T.I.K. as Hastings, old friends, stood there helplessly, for this unstoppable king, this king who had never retreated in battle, was now silent. The palace was filled with the constant sound of footsteps, the smell of fragrance and unbearable waiting. The news spread rapidly. Alexander's condition is no longer simply a cause for concern. This is fatal. This conqueror of Asia, who had fled death for as long as 10 years, was finally surpassed. As Alexander's high fever intensified, the atmosphere in the palace changed from worry to extreme panic. His companions, those who fought side by side with him for over a decade, were not just officers. They were childhood friends and comrades minus arms, but also political rivals. With Alexander's decline, their unity began to split. Every whisper carries the weight of an empire. Every exchange of glances implies doubt, ambition, or fear. Hadeucas was a royal guard and one of Alexander's most trusted commanders. He positioned himself as the guardian of the king's bedroom. He controlled his contact with Alexander and decided which generals could enter and when. Some people think this is loyalty, while others consider it the first step to seizing power. Tom Lay is a shrewd and charismatic general who has long kept a strategic distance from Picus. He closely follows Picus and has already been assessing changes in the balance of power. The supporters of the veteran generals C. Elliot Ross, Sayoke as and Pes even felt that the empire was in chaos before their kings died. Rumors multiplied like flies in the heat waves of Babylon. One faction whispered that Alexander was poisoned by either Cassandi or Illyrians, the sons of Antipas. Another group blamed Meligar, who recently had a conflict with Ticaeus over military promotion. There are still some people muttering curses, prophecies and divine jealousy, saying that the Bolts have finally grown tired of a mortal who claimed to be equal to them. Because there was no clear information, suspicion pervaded the palace hall. The companions took turns gathering by Alexander's bedside. I watched the king struggling to breathe, his skin turning red from the fever. Some people held his hand, some knelt on the ground praying, and others silently calculated their next move. For many years, they have been following an unbreakable will of a person. Now, this will is flickering like a torch in the wind, and no one knows what will happen when it eventually goes out. The Macedonian soldiers stationed outside became restless. They asked to see their king. They asked him to promise that he would recover. They hoped that someone, anyone, would tell them what will happen next. Without Alexander, they became headless dragons, thousands of miles away from home, surrounded by a conquered nation that could rise at any time. This tense situation is sufficient to trigger violence. The companions were usually so decisive in battle, but now they felt numb. Without Alexander's voice, they turned into anxious shadows. An empire can be conquered by an army, but it can also easily collapse out of fear. In those suffocating days when the palace trembled with uncertainty, everyone understood the truth they dared not say. The fate of the world depends on a dying man. As Alexander's condition worsened, Babylon transformed from a royal capital into a pressure cooker that could explode at any moment. Outside the palace gate, thousands of Macedonian soldiers gathered together. There were veterans who had experienced 10 years of conquest. These people followed Alexander through the desert, through the frozen mountain passes, and into the heart of the empire. They once fought side by side with him in battle. They buried their friend beside him. Now, as rumors of his impending death spread, they demanded the right to see him in person, but Tigas and other commanders hesitated, letting tens of thousands of fully armed, terrified and grief-stricken soldiers flood into the palace might immediately trigger violence. The mood within the army has become very unstable. The soldiers were worried that if their king died, they would be abandoned in a foreign land. They were afraid that the Greek detachment would rebel. They were worried that the cities conquered by Alexander would launch retaliatory uprisings. Most importantly, they are afraid of the unknown. Who will command them when Alexander is away? Who will pay their wages? Who will lead them home? This is a dangerous combination. Loyalty turned into despair. When the generals tried to keep the army away from the palace, people roared. They accused their commander of concealing the truth and planning to take over the empire themselves. Some soldiers threw stones at the messenger. Others brandished their shields and shouted Alexander's name until their throats felt hot. Tensions broke out when a group of infantry forced their way towards the palace entrance, but were blocked by the elite royal guards. For a moment, the two sides were on the verge of conflict. It was only because of the fear of humiliating Alexander that the two sides did not have a conflict. Finally, to prevent a public rebellion, the commanders gave in. The most unforgettable scene in ancient history unfolded. The dying king could hardly move. He requested to be carried out on the stretcher so that his soldiers could see him. He couldn't speak, but he slowly raised his hand to greet them. His move quelled the anger of thousands of people. The battle-hardened veteran shed tears. Some people pleaded with him to recover soon, while others whispered prayers as he passed by. They understood what his silence meant. Their king was dying, but he did not abandon them. Even in extreme pain, he still paid tribute to them with his last strength. That moment quelled the military's mood, but it did not resolve the deeper crisis. The soldiers returned to the camp with sadness rather than anger. But when they returned, they also brought a terrifying piece of news. Alexander, the adhesive that held their vast empire together, would not survive this week. Without him, the world they had built with blood and fire was about to fall apart. On the 10th day of his fever, Alexander almost lost consciousness. The palace was filled with the smell of incense, low prayers and the steady footsteps of anxious attendants. His generals crowded the room, their faces filled with fear and exhaustion. What they need most is a successor. This empire stretched from Greece all the way to India. Without clean air, chaos is not only possible, but also inevitable. That Alexander had no legitimate adult son. His wife, Roxana, is pregnant. No one knows if the baby will be a boy. His half-minus brother Adas is still alive, but he suffers from cognitive impairment and is not fit to rule alone. The commander squeezed in, demanding guidance. Who should inherit the greatest empire in the world? Alexander, on and off, seemed to understand. His voice had almost vanished for several days, but when asked who he hoped would succeed him to the throne, the dying king finally whispered something, causing the entire room to tremble. For the strongest. These words were so faint that some people claimed they didn't hear them. Others insisted that he was talking about something completely different, perhaps a tortoise, the name of a powerful general who was not present. The vet enduring version, the one held by the person standing beside him, is obvious. Alexander left his empire to power rather than bloodline. This is a smart and astonishing answer. With just this one sentence, he ensured that his generals, who were experienced, ambitious and competitive, would fight for control of the empire he had established. Some people later blamed him for this matter. Others think that he is very clear about what he is doing. His companions were all soldiers who had been tempered through years of warfare. He believes that their power surpasses any bloodline. But his generals wanted more. They gathered around him again and asked how his funeral should be arranged. Even in the final moments of his life, Alexander thought like a king. He said he hoped to be buried in the sanctuary of Ammon in Siva, where the Egyptian priests had declared him the son of Zeus. This is a symbolic choice, linking his death to his identity as a god. Not long after, Alexander completely lost the ability to speak. His eyes blurred and his breathing slowed down to a faint, shrill sound. All the companions held their breath. The servant wiped the sweat off his forehead. Outside, Thousands upon thousands of soldiers were waiting, unable to accept what was happening inside. At the age of 32, Alexander the Great quietly passed away, leaving behind a world that would never agree to his last words and would never recover from the consequences of them. The moment Alexander died, a strange silence enveloped Babylon. No horn sounded, no announcement was made, only a quiet consciousness the heart of a vast empire had stopped beating. His companions stood there in a daze, staring at the corpse of the man who had once led them across the continent. For the silence didn't last long. Outside the palace, thousands of soldiers demanded an answer. Inside, the most powerful person in the world turned around and asked the other person a question that had not been spoken out. What should be done now? The problem is huge. Alexander ruled not merely a kingdom, but a kingdom pieced together from newly conquered territories, which were entirely held together by his charm and authority. There is no established system and no powerful enough bureaucratic machine to operate independently. His generals performed well in wars, but they never needed to rule such a vast empire. They have always relied on Alexander's decisions, his vision and his unremitting efforts. Now they are faced with an impossible task. That is, to find someone to replace him. Two factions emerged immediately. Tikas and his supporters believe that if Roxana's unborn child is a boy, then power should belong to them until he reaches adulthood. This will have a huge impact on Tix. Against them were the infantry informally led by Miligi, who hoped that Alexander's half-minus brother Erodoes would be crowned king. The spirit of Erodos is not suitable for governance, but this is precisely the crux of the matter. He is controllable. The debate turned into shouting, threats and accusations. Even before Alexander's body cooled down, those who had once conquered the world together had already been divided in their minds. The corridors of Babylon echoed with voices of debate. Some generals left the meeting in a rage. Others conspired secretly. Some people talk about splitting the empire into several independent kingdoms. But this idea is regarded as treason. Alexander shed blood for every inch of land. Meanwhile, the soldiers became restless again. They will not tolerate the elites making decisions behind closed doors. What they want is clarity, stability and salary. Most importantly, they hope to be assured that the empire they built with their blood will not collapse in the civil war. For several days, negotiations have been teetering on the brink of violence. No solution can satisfy everyone. But one thing is clear. Without Alexander's voice, unity was slipping through their fingers. The empire that once stretched like a golden thread from Greece to India began to wear out. Alexander's death created a vacuum that nature, politics and ambition were all eager to fill. The fragile alliance among Alexander's companions broke almost immediately. This once unified force composed of outstanding commanders has now split into hostile factions, each believing itself to be the legitimate successor of the empire. The Greeks later called them Diadochi, that is, the successors, and their struggle would plunge the ancient world into nearly 40 years of war. The first spark came from Babylon itself. Tikas was appointed as the regent of the unborn child of Aeledus and Roxana, believing that he held supreme power. Many officials accepted this, but others were angry at his growing power. Mielgia, the champion of the infantry, refused to acknowledge Tikas' control. Tensions broke out when Milega's army stormed into the palace and threatened the Macedonian parliament, demanding that Aeledus be crowned immediately. In the corridor on Alexander's deathbed, a massacre almost broke out. Paducas responded without mercy. After carefully regaining control, he arrested and executed Milig. This is a clear message to anyone who challenges him. But even such a decisive action could not prevent the crack from expanding. Trust has vanished, and now all conversations are filled with suspicion. The generals once galloped towards the unknown together, but now they surround each other like wolves. During the division of Babylon, the empire was divided into vast tracts of territory. Ptolemy received Egypt, a rich yet strategically isolated region. He immediately began to grow strong. Seleucus gained the command of his cavalry companions. Antigonus occupied the lands of F, by and Asia Minor. Lyc and Narcus occupied Thrace. Everyone accepted their new territory with a polite smile, but behind those smiles lies an ambition burning like a fever. Alexander conquered the world in the name of unification. His successor is prepared to break it up. Fodika, determined to maintain central authority, soon clashed with these rising powers. Tommy was the first to openly rebel against him. He hijacked Alexander's funeral procession and transported the king's body to Egypt, an act that symbolized the legitim, his innard of his rule. Atik's was enraged, and this anger eventually destroyed him. For the wars of the Diodod were not merely political, they are private. For more than a decade, these people have shared tents, battlefields and dangers. They know each other's strengths and weaknesses very well. Their competition stemmed from past resentment, jealousy and different views on Alexander's legacy. Every battle they fought was not only out of ambition, but also to become the inheritors of the legend. It is regarded as the true continuation of Alexander the Great's greatness. The era of conquest came to an end. The era of success has begun. Even after his death, Alexander the Great refused to rest in peace. His body became the most controversial object in the ancient world. This award has political legitimacy, sacred symbolic significance, and the right to carry on his mantle. Many people believe that whoever possesses Alexander's body can claim to be his true successor. Therefore, even his funeral became a battlefield. Alexander once requested to be buried in the sanctuary of Ammon-Siva, a sacred place in the Egyptian desert, where the priests once praised him as the son of Zeus. But his generals had other plans. Tik's was determined to maintain control over the entire empire. He ordered the construction of a luxurious carriage to bring Alexander back to Macedonia. This huge golden vehicle, shaped like a temple and pulled by 64 mules, is a rolling monument symbolizing the king's greatness and Tik's intention to protect his legacy. That Tommy kept watching the development of the situation with a shrewd eye. As the ruler of Egypt, he understood the power of having Alexander's body. Egypt has a sacred tradition of monarchy, which can transform him from an ordinary general into the successor of a pharaoh. When the funeral procession left Babylon, Tommy acted promptly. His troops intercepted the carriage near Syria and transferred the body to Egypt. This was a trump card, bloodless, symbolic and devastating to pride. When the news reached Babylon, Tik's flew into a rage. He accused Tommy of treason, blasphemy and betrayal, but the matter has already been accomplished. Alexander's remains were successively placed in Memphis and Alexandria, where Tommy built a magnificent mausoleum that attracted pilgrims, scholars and rulers from all over the Mediterranean. The theft of the body changed everything. Pratika's authority collapsed. His allies questioned his strength. His enemies praised Tommy's talent. Its symbolic meaning is obvious. Alexander might have left his empire to the most powerful person, and Tommy has just proved his intention. Not long after, Padudius launched ill-fated invasion of Egypt, where he suffered defeat, mutiny and death. His pursuit of hegemony was shattered by those carrying Alexander's body. In other ancient times, Alexander's tomb remained one of the most respected places in the world. Julius Caesar, Cleopatra and Augustus all once visited here. The rulers prayed there, seeking fragments of Alexander's charm. But as time went by, the location of the mausoleum vanished from history, being swallowed up by quicksand and urban expansion. Even today, the resting place of this greatest conqueror in the world remains one of the most enduring mysteries in history. A king without a tomb. Alexander the Great died young, but his legend endures. In the years following his death, his empire split into competing kingdoms. His generals betrayed and killed each other, and his family was wiped out in the ruthless struggle of the royal family. However, none of this weakened the influence of his name. If there is any difference, it is that the ensuing chaos merely magnified the scale of his achievements. No one can hold the world together as he does. No one can gain such loyalty, nor can anyone stir up such fear. As war swept through the empire he had established, stories about Alexander emerged one after another. The soldiers marching behind him recalled his brave and crazy moments. Scholars recorded his battles, turning the war into an epic. The poet elevated him to the height of myth, comparing him to Achilles. Dying isn't even the gods. From the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, parents tell their children the story of the king who rode across the world like a storm, weeping because there was no more land to conquer. Even his shortcomings have become part of the legend. His temper, his alcoholism, His ruthless ambition minus all these are intertwined in his portrait. His humanity is as great as his achievements. Alexander was not portrayed as a perfect hero. In people's memory, he was driven by a force that transcended ordinary desires. It is necessary to test the limit that an ordinary person can achieve. This intensity makes him both admirable and intimidating. Meanwhile, the kingdom of his successor developed into a powerful country. For instance, Egypt, the Sut-Hud Empire, Macedonia, and so on. They built cities, libraries, temples, and trade networks, shaping the ancient world for centuries. However, each of them, whether openly or subtly, claimed to be the true bearer of Alexander's legacy. His generals fought for his empire, but they also fought for his memory. It seemed that ruling under his shadow gave them legitimacy, and over time, Alexander became a universal symbol. The Romans studied his tactics. Medieval Europeans called him the perfect king. Islamic scholars admire his curiosity and patience. The Asian tradition has preserved his story version, making him a wandering philosopher hero. Wherever his name goes, it will adapt, transforming into something new, while retaining its core. The idea of boundless ambition might be his greatest legacy. Alexander's empire did not survive after his death, but his example lived on. The belief that a person can change the world with courage and vision. He died in Babylon at the age of 32, but his legend never ended. It exists in every story of conquest, every map of ancient glory, and every dream that realizes the impossible. In the rugged valleys and forested mountains of ancient Syria, spirituality was not confined to walled temples or marble shrines. It lives outdoors, in the rustling of ancient oak trees, in the echoes of waterfalls, and in the wind blowing over limestone cliffs. On this land, nature itself is regarded as sacred. Here, the boundary between the human world and the domains of the gods and ancestors is so thin that it cannot be reached. Standing at the center of this spiritual landscape is the Syrian priestess. These women are far more than just attendants to the ceremony. They are the intermediaries between the tribe and the intangible forces that influence their lives. They are renowned for their acute intuition, in Midas depth understanding of herbs and incredible ability to interpret natural signs. They are the spiritual pillar of the Syrian tribes. During times of war, famine, marriage, childbirth and negotiations, people all sought their presence. When the leader wavers or the warrior doubts, it is the high priestess who consults the omen and gives instructions in a low voice. The sacred forest is their refuge, and clusters of ancient trees are regarded as the harbor protecting the soul. Their small forest may consist of tall oaks, whose roots curl up like snakes through the soil, or mountain pines groaning in the wind, like the voices of their ancestors. These spaces are deliberately not affected by the axis. They were not allowed to hunt or make a fire with wood. Even the chiefs humbly approached the woods, took down their weapons and spoke in low voices. In these living natural circles, priests hold ceremonies, mixing songs, dances and offerings of grains, milk, wine or honey together. From a very young age, the chosen girl showed signs of connection. Perhaps they had vivid dreams. Perhaps the animals' reactions to them are very strange. Perhaps they walked into the forest and came back talking about light or sound. When the elders notice these characteristics, the girl will be taken to the high priestess for assessment. If accepted, she will undergo years of training to learn hymns, divination techniques, herbs, and the symbolic languages of fire, wind, and water. Syrians believe that women have a unique sensitivity to the spiritual world. Their intuition, life-giving ability and profound emotional intelligence make them ideal vessels for conveying sacred messages. When the priestess was in a trance, people believed that God was speaking through her. When she raised her hands to the sky, the clans felt protected. When she walked through the sacred forest, even the wind seemed to have quieted down. These women are respected, feared, and relied upon. They are the secret force behind Syria's decision-making. On this land where nature and divinity are inseparable, they are the guardians of spiritual balance. Divination is at the core of the tradition of Syrian priestesses. To understand the will of God, the priestesses did not turn to scrolls or engraved inscriptions, but to the living elements of nature. Syrians believe that the universe constantly communicates through the rustling of leaves, the movement of smoke, the direction of the wind and the crackling of fire. The task of a priestess is to listen. The wind is one of the most sacred messengers. In the sanctuary on the mountain top, the air freely flows over the stone altar. The priestesses will spread their arms wide and half-minus close their eyes, waiting for the change of wind direction. A sudden change in direction may be interpreted as approval or warning. The warm breeze is regarded as ancestral comfort. The biting cold wind foretells tension or conflict ahead. The entire clan postponed raids, migrations or diplomatic meetings, depending on how the wind spoke through the priestess. To outsiders, this might seem mysterious, but to Syrians, it is normal as looking at the cloud before a storm. Fire is equally indispensable. The torchlight is not only used in ceremonies but also in communication with the gods. The priestess lights the sacred fire in the forest, cave or temple on the mountain top. They observed the flames intently, their height, color, and the way the sparks jumped upwards. If the flame hisses or bends sharply in one direction, people think that there is a ghost trying to speak. When the flame burns steadily uncleanly, it means that the offering has been accepted. When they suddenly make crackling sounds or suddenly go dark, it indicates that there is something in the village that needs to be cleaned or taken care of. And at major ceremonies, the priestess would sprinkle herbs, juniper, sage, thyme or wildflowers into the fire. Each plant produces different scents and smoke patterns, enabling her to interpret different levels of meaning. The smoke drifting eastward is related to a new beginning. The smoke swirling downward hinted at potential danger. The villagers held their breath and watched the priestess draw shapes in the smoke, murmuring prayers to the souls of their ancestors. But perhaps the most dramatic ceremony is to enter a trance beside the sacred flame. The priestess cross-legged, her eyes fixed on the burning embers, breathing slowly until her mind reached the end of life. Witnesses reported that her voice would become deep or soft, and her gestures would become smooth and dreamy. At these moments, people believe that she has traveled to another world to obtain information from the souls of Preno, the Idiathos, or those shrouded in the mountains. The chiefs of Syria fully believe in these illusions. A priestess's divination can trigger a war, end a long-standing feud, or save a village from famine. Her explanation has spiritual authority, so few people dare to question it. In this land ruled by both the blade and the soul, she is the voice guiding the entire tribe. For Syrians, the boundary between the living and the dead is very thin, was ever changing as the mist over a mountain lake. Ancestors are not distant memories. They are the power of the present, safeguarding their descendants. Each clan believed that their strength, luck and prosperity stemmed from respecting those who had once lived, as well as those responsible for maintaining the sacred relationship with the priestesses entrusted as guardians of ancestral memory. The roles began with ritual knowledge. The history of each clan was not recorded in writing, but was passed down from one priestess to another in the form of songs in Zandoral genealogies. They have memorized the bloodline sequences over the centuries and recite the names of their ancestors loudly before seasonal festivals or major decisions. It is believed that the high priestess will wake them up and ensure their presence in life. This practice strengthened the unity of the tribe. It reminds soldiers, farmers and leaders that they are part of something older and greater than themselves. The priestess also supervises the right to bury. Unlike the Greeks or Romans, Syrians place more emphasis on soil and stone rather than memorial buildings. The corpse was placed in a shallow grave or stone bag, surrounded by personal belongings, weapons, jewelry, waterers, or bone-carved amulets. The priestess performs a purification ceremony, including water and smoke, guiding the soul safely to the realm of the ancestors. Without her blessing, people believe that this soul would wander restlessly, leading to illness or misfortune. The communication among ancestors is another important task. When drought strikes, livestock falls ill, or when disputes threaten the division of the tribe, families will turn to the priestess. She entered a trance state, usually in a hidden cave known for its echoes, where Syrians believe that the voice of the deceased will naturally speak in a low voice. There, she demanded clarification. Which ancestor was unhappy? points that need to be corrected. Sometimes the answer is simply to offer bread or milk. At other times, the solutions are much more complicated, such as ending a long minor-standing feud, mending a broken vow, or returning land that was unfairly expropriated. Seasonal festivals expand her role. During the winter solstice, when the boundaries between the worlds are considered to be thinning, the High Priestess presides over an all-night ceremony with torches and rhythmic hymns. The entire tribe participated, praying to their ancestors for blessings in the coming year. She guided them to dance a dance symbolizing rebirth, survival and collective strength. Every movement, every chant, reinforces the notion that the ancestors were watching, and their favor determined the future of the tribe. In the beliefs of Syrians, a community without ancestors is like a body without a soul. It was the priestess who guaranteed that this connection would never break. She guards the intangible bridge that connects the past and the present, giving form and meaning to the identity of the tribe for generations. Although Syrian priestesses are renowned for divination and ancestral rituals, another aspect of their authority lies in their in-depth understanding of herbs, therapies and traditional treatments. In this land overgrown with mountains and fields, where the weather is unpredictable and tribal conflicts are frequent, the priestess is not only a spiritual guide, but also the person closest to a doctor in many communities. Her therapeutic art blends practical knowledge with sacred symbols, creating a system where medicine and magic seamlessly interweave. Her training began very early. The apprentices learned to identify plants of each season, from purple hawthorn flowers to bitter hyla roots. They studied how leaves wither at different temperatures, how bark changes texture as it ages, and how certain flowers only bloom at dawn or dusk. Knowledge is passed on orally through metaphors and stories. A plant that whispers at night may calm a fever, biting the tip of the tongue and detoxify. Long before written medical literature emerged in the region, these poetic descriptions had already helped novices remember complex attributes. The priestess was an expert in making ointments, tinctures, potions and tea. They treat a wide range of diseases, from fractures and wound infections to complications during childbirth and snake bites. Hunters rely on them to detoxify venom. The soldiers believed that their ointment could prevent infection after the battle. Even chiefs would seek their advice for lingering diseases. Therapeutic sessions are often held near flowing water or in sacred woods, where the environment itself enhances the spiritual aspect of recovery. However, healing has never been purely physical treatment. For Syrians, diseases also have emotional and mental causes. A person who has nightmares may be told that he has angered an ancestor. Women with chronic pain may carry unspoken resentment or sadness. The priestess listened carefully, not only providing herbs but also offering symbolic rituals. Hand juniper to clean the house, tie knots with wool thread, or bury a small offering at the foot of an old oak tree. These actions have restored balance, which is a key principle of the Syrian faith. Some rites are dramatic. In cases of serious illness, the priestess conducts time healing, ignites flames and recites scriptures until the flames rise steadily and strongly. She put specific herbs into the fire and interpreted the crackling sound as a sign of progress. The family watched anxiously as she surrounded the patient with cigarettes and whispered prayers to the mountain god for strength. Once recovered, gratitude often turns into a lifetime of loyalty. Because of this healing wisdom, the priestesses were highly respected. They carry the trust of mothers, soldiers, elders and children. Their therapy spread in the valley and influenced the neighboring tribes. In an era where survival depends on harmonious coexistence with nature, the priestess stands at the intersection of knowledge and faith. His touch implies scientific intuition and spiritual comfort. In Syrian society, politics and religion have always been inseparable. Chiefs can command warriors, negotiate alliances and enforce tribal laws, but the orders of the priestesses were more profound. Legitimacy, their insight determined the fate of the tribe. When tensions intensify, when ominous signs ding, or when hostile tribes are on the verge of conflict, leaders will seek clarification from the high priestess. She is the voice that transforms the will of gods and ancestors into human actions. Before any war, her role is indispensable. It was not until the priestess recited the Prime Inus war omens that the soldiers began to march. This kind of ceremony is held in a sacred forest or a shrine on a mountain, where the wind can front freely. She listened to the rustling of leaves, observed the paths taken by birds, or the bones marked on animal skins. If the omens were favorable, she would bless these weapons, soaking the blades in holy water or scrubbing them with juniper branches to protect them. But if the omens foretold the approach of disaster, even the most ferocious war leaders would hesitate to launch an attack on the priestess's council, for fear of risking the wrath of the gods. Her influence extends beyond the battlefield. In negotiations between rival tribes, she is often the mediator, or at least the invisible force behind the agreements. At the meeting held around the fire pit, the priestess stood or sat beside the chief, providing a spiritual explanation for the political choices. She not only took into account the actual benefits, but also the expectations of her ancestors. Which choice respects the past vows? Which road would offend the deity that guards this land? At certain moments, her words changed history. Syria has a well-documented tradition, where it is said that priestesses prevent attacks by declaring that violence is prohibited on certain days or in certain seasons. In the sacred period, the earth needs rest and bloodshed is prohibited. Even the strongest soldiers obeyed. This taboo is too sacred to be violated. During these pauses, tribes formed temporary alliances, held banquets, or settled their grievances. However, the priestess also played the role of a protector of peace in the tribe. If family relations are tense, she will ask both sides to perform a purification ceremony. People light fires, burn bitter herbs to dispel resentment, and tied into symbolic knots, representing the relaxation of conflicts. Such behavior prevented the struggle from evolving into a long-term vendettas. During famines, plagues, and natural disasters, priestesses became the pillars of the community. She explained what offerings were needed to restore balance, whether it was food offerings, public fasting, or respecting the rights of neglected ancestors. At a time when the world was in turmoil, her guidance gave people hope. Her influence was so profound that Syrian warriors often said, "Tribes advance under the leadership of chiefs, but survive under the leadership of priestesses." In the spiritual tradition of Syria, priestesses are not merely selected, they have been transformed. Becoming a priestess requires going through a series of powerful initiation ceremonies, reshaping one's identity, enhancing intuition, and connecting the new member with the spiritual world. These rituals are designed to test courage, discipline, and sensitivity to the unknown. Through them, a girl stepped out of her ordinary life, entered the sacred path, and was reborn as a vessel of sacred knowledge. The initiation ceremony usually begins under the moonlight at night. The moon is regarded as a symbol of female power and mental clarity. The high priestess led him to an open space in a sacred small woods, where only the crackling of small flames broke the silence. He enlightened her where simple clothes made of undyed wool, symbolizing purity, humility, and preparation. Around her neck hung an amulet carved from bone or stone, which was an amulet that linked her to the souls of her ancestors. The first stage is the silent trial. For a whole day and night, the beginner stayed completely quiet, listening to the sounds of the forest. Syrians believe that true spiritual harmony begins when a person learns to hear voices beyond those of humans. The fluttering of birds, the movement of the wind, the chirping of distant animals, and even the subtle movement of leaves. This silence trains the elevators to recognize patterns and information that others regard as noise and disdain. The second stage includes learning hymns and rhythmic breathing techniques. The priestesses believed that if used properly, this voice could open the way to God. By controlling her breathing, the ascender prepares her mind to enter a trance state. Opportunities pass from the hands of the elders to the hands of the newcomers, like an ancient torch that never breaks with reverence. The final and most terrifying stage is entering a trance state. Under strict supervision, this fellow practitioner sat before the sacred flame, inhaling the fragrant smoke of juniper, thyme, and wormwood. It is well known that these herbs can cause clarity and acute perception. When the heat wave swept over her, the opportunity came, and the beginner entered a trance state tamed, revealing her mental potential. Some describe the illusions of ancestors or luminous figures. Others feel like they are drifting in the forest or mountains. These visions are interpreted by high priestesses, who determine whether the new couple possesses the depth required for the duties of a priest. If she succeeds, she will receive a ritual mark, usually a spiral or wavy symbol drawn on her arm or forehead with ashes and herbal ointment. These signs indicate her rebirth, her connection with the sacred, and her readiness to serve. Joining a club is not merely a rite of passage. This is a transformation that enables women to lead the clan through difficult times, explain the unknown, and pass on the spiritual heritage of the Syrians to each generation. From the territory of Syria, certain landscapes are regarded as the pulsation of spiritual power. In these places, the earth feels alive, and there, the veil between the mortal world and the sacred world is thin enough to let information slip away. These are sacred forests, caves, springs and mountain peaks, guarded by priests and protected by strict laws. Those who know the consequences of trespass are afraid of these places. These spaces are at the core of Syrian rituals and identities. Among them, the most respected is the sacred forest. These places are not gardens or farmlands, but clusters of wild ancient trees, usually oaks, beeches or pines. Their huge roots and stems twisted on the earth, like powerful blood vessels. No lumberjack dared to go in. No hunter crosses their border to hunt for prey. Even the army would stop and lay down their weapons, as a sign of respect when passing through these woods. Syrians believe that deities dwell among the rustling leaves, ancestral, natural, or sacred, and that disturbing the forest would enrage them. The priestess made sure that these spaces would not be touched. A purification ceremony is held whenever outsiders approach. Another important sacred space is the cave. Priestesses in Syria often ventured deep into caves to exercise their power, especially when seeking illusions or communicating with their ancestors. The cave reverberated with a spine-chilling clear echo, and the whispering ends multiplied into an unforgettable layered harmony. For Syrians, this is more than just acoustics. That was the ghost's reply. In these caves, the priestesses light small fires or torches and watch the shadows flicker on the walls. The movements of these shadows, like smoke or wind, became part of their divination methods. Flowing water also held significant spiritual meaning. Springs and mountain streams are regarded as the gateway to healing the soul. Many rituals related to diseases or purification are held beside these waters. The priestesses clean the ritual items, wash the participants, and explain the patterns of floating leaves or ripples. Some springs were so sacred that without the blessing of the priestess, the soldiers refused to drink them. But not all sacred spaces are open to everyone. Forbidden areas do exist. In temples deep in the forest or high on the cliff can only be entered by priestesses. These places store the relics of ancestors, symbolic stones, or ritual altars. Violating these boundaries is regarded as one of the most serious crimes. Legend has it that when hunters enter the forbidden zone and return home, they are cursed by misfortune, troubled by nightmares, or suddenly fall ill. Whether it is superstition or reality, these stories ensure the safety of the space. These sacred landscapes form the spiritual map of life in Syria. They shaped rituals, guided migrations, and constantly reminded people that nature shares the same spiritual level as the gods and ancestors. It is the priestesses who navigate in these fields, ensuring that each tribe remains in harmony with the forces that protect them. Every Syrian priestess carries a series of sacred items with her, which are believed to possess protective power, ancestral memories, or sacred energy. These amulets are not decorative. They are tools, companions, and, in many cases, an extension of the authority of the priestess. Each item has its own history and purpose, which is made through rituals and maintained through continuous spiritual care. They jointly reflect the profound symbolic worldview of Syrian society. One of the most important items is the spirit knot, a rope made of wool or linen, usually dyed in earthy color. Priestesses use these ropes in rituals involving fate, oaths, or emotional healing. By tying or untying knots in a specific pattern, they symbolically bind or release energy, emotions, or ancestral obligations. A tightly knotted rope can represent protection, while a rope slowly untangled implies the easing of conflict. People often regard these knots as amulets, believing that they carry the blessings of the priestess. Another important item is the herbal bag, which is a small leather bag filled with dried plants, roots, and powder. Every kind of herb has its significance. Juniper symbolizes purity, thyme represents clarity, the muggle evoked a dream, and Aro protected the warrior in the battle. Before the ceremony begins, the priestess might pinch out a small piece of the mixture from her bag, throw it into the fire, and let the rising smoke carry the prayer to the deities. Just carefully choosing one plant can change the meaning of a wedding. Home amulets carry a deeper ancestral significance. These amulets are usually made of deer, wolves or bones, and are engraved with spiral shapes, sun symbols, waves or geometric patterns. The spiral symbolizes the cycle and rebirth of life. Fire represents communication with other fields. The triangle evokes the energy and sacred insight of women. These bones were passed down from generation to generation by the priestesses. It is said that some of them contain the essence of the first priestesses who lived several centuries ago. Priestesses also used sacred bowls, which were usually carved from stone or made of clay. These bowls hold water during purification ceremonies or burn embers during trance ceremonies. The patterns drawn on them, such as zigzag, circles or animal designs, enhance their symbolic power. When a priestess held a bowl and walked around a sick person, with water rippling in the firelight, the tribe believed that the bowl itself was whispering the guidance of the gods. Feathers also play an important role. The feathers of an eagle symbolize courage. The feathers of an owl represent wisdom and the night. The feathers of crows are linked to the information of their ancestors. These feathers worn on the hair or tucked into the belt symbolize the priestess's current spiritual mission. These items are by no means casual trinkets. They are the pipes that connect the earth, the sky and the soul. When a priestess walks into the ritual space with these sacred tools, she is no longer just a woman. She is a living bridge between Syrians and the intangible world that guides them. When the classical world came into conflict with Syria through Greek colonists, Macedonian kings and eventually Roman expansion, many of Syria's cultures were changed forever. However, the memory of the priestess is still deeply rooted in the mountains, stories and traditions of this land. Their influence has not vanished. It has changed, reverberating for centuries like a calm heartbeat beneath layers of new beliefs. The legacy of Syrian priestesses serves as a hidden thread running through Balkan folklore, spirituality and cultural identity. As Roman rule strengthened in the region, sacred forest were cleared or reused, ancestral altars were dismantled, and the political structure of the tribes was replaced by foreign governments. That the spiritual tradition will not be easily erased. Rural communities continue to secretly observe old customs. Women, usually mothers, midwives and herbalists, preserve fragments of the wisdom of the priestesses and pass them down quietly from generation to generation. The knowledge of medicinal herbs has been passed down in the mountain village. The ritual with smoke, fire and water was disguised as a folk tradition that preserved, and the story of the far miner's sighted female sage was given new life in the form of a legend. The shadows of these ancient figures can still be found in folk tales across the Balkan Peninsula. The stories of those women who explain the wind, those who talk to their ancestors in their dreams, or those who can accidentally calm the storm, hint at the priestesses who once held formal authority. Even in later myths, the concept of Zan as a mountain fairies might have retained the memory of priestesses who lived near sacred landscapes and had supernatural influence. These echoes remind us that powerful women once shaped the spiritual and political life of the Vilayet Rib. The tradition of priestesses has also left its mark on cultural identity. Their ceremony emphasizes the harmony between man and nature. This relationship is still visible in rural communities, where trees, springs and mountains are all held in quiet awe. The belief that certain places possess unique spiritual energy still exists, as do the ancestors and the idea of providing protection and guidance. These values have withstood foreign conquests, religious changes and centuries of evolution. Modern archaeology has begun to reveal these traditional physical traces. Carved burned amulets, cave altars blackened by ancient smoke, and jewelry believed to belong to ritual experts. These findings confirm the stories passed down orally, proving that Syrian priestesses not only exist in myths, but also in daily life. However, their true legacy lies in the lasting respect for intuitive wisdom, healing knowledge and the sacred power of women. The priestesses of Syria may no longer stand in the woods or chant the sacred fire, but their spirit endures in the cultural memory of the region, and the story of every wise woman, in every ritual commemorating ancestors, and in every mountain spring believed to have protective power, there is still a fragment of an ancient priestess speaking, reminding us of a world in which women guide their tribes not through force, but through insight, tradition, and the sacred voice passed on by wind and fire.